House Targail. It was a name once known as the Emperor's Sword and the glory of the Empire. However, when the name no longer had any significance, it fell. Well, maybe saying it fell would not be accurate. It hit rock bottom. That's why Hergines Targail, the eldest daughter of House Targail, was ordered to marry a man chosen by the Emperor. Now, Hergines was not happy with that order, but the interesting part was that she was thinking that an arranged marriage would be impossible to imagine in Korea. Obviously, those thoughts would not make any sense for a normal woman in a swords and magic world. However, Hergines was clearly not a normal woman. Nevertheless, while our blonde female protagonist was thinking about the modern world, her now fiancé was discussing the ground rules of their future married life. Those rules covered a wide range of things such as establishing Kyroxis as the middle name, sleeping together only once a week for their successor's sake, not intervening in each other's matters, and not begging for affection or love. Of course, it was hard to tell how much attention was Hergines paying, since she was very focused on thinking that if her family was powerful like before, she would have not agreed to that. Sadly, they became powerless during her generation. Luckily, not everything was bad, since the woman considered that her husband-to-be was extremely good-looking. After all, the possibility of being forced to marry some wrinkly geezer was very real. However, in that scenario, the blonde lady would have lost it and wiped out the imperial family. Well, at least that was what she thought. Nevertheless, despite his good looks, her fiancé had a serious attitude problem. It was obvious that she had been observing and analyzing him, and she noticed how confident he was about making her fall for him. Hergines really looked like she had everything under control at that moment. But when the man asked her if there was something she'd like to say, the mask broke apart completely. The blonde woman immediately got nervous and grabbed the contract he had prepared in order to read it as fast as possible, because she knew that was her only chance at a rebuttal. Of course, Hergines didn't allow her nervousness to get the best of her. She quickly regained control and even started to change some of the rules the man pretended to establish. However, those changes were not expected at all by him. Sleeping once a week. How about once a month instead? Having breakfast together every morning. Totally unnecessary. Respecting each other's personal time. That needed to be emphasized. The man almost tripped and started flinching due to his surprise. However, Hergines was not planning of letting him go, and she kept making changes in every rule he had proposed. She even went as far as to complain about the way he was talking to her, since until they get married she was still of higher status than him, so talking down to her was totally inappropriate. It was at this moment when our female protagonist started narrating her life in that new world since the beginning. She was born in that world with her memories of her past life. In that previous life, she had been born into a wealthy family in Korea. After practicing kendo, which she had a talent for at that time, she took on fencing by chance. That led her to become a member of the national fencing team. Sadly, as she was preparing for the Olympics, a jealous team member pushed her down the stairs, ending her life at a young age without even a chance to win a medal. Afterwards, she was reborn as part of House Targail. House Targail was known as the Emperor's Sword. In each generation, a child with talent in swordsmanship was born. Nevertheless, for unknown reasons, a child with such talent had not been born into the family for quite some time. Then her brother Shaun was born, but even he wasn't talented with a sword. Years went by and their parents passed away while they were still young, and the family business also failed, putting them in debt. They asked for the imperial family's help, but they refused them every time. The Order of Targail was also disbanded. They sold everything they had to survive, barely paying off their debt, and all that was left in their huge state were just Shaun and her. As the older sister, she was aware that she needed to make money to feed her brother and keep their state. The thing was how she was going to do that. Of course, she could have gotten married to a rich merchant, but the thought of that alone disgusted her, since they were not her type and she didn't want to throw her life away that easily. However, what could a daughter of a count do to make a living? In that moment, she had the idea of trying something with a sword, since she had wielded one in her past life, and the moment she went to the storage and grabbed a training sword, she felt chills going down her spine. It was as if she'd held a sword all her life. In the end, she came to a huge realization. The one who had the talent had been her all along. Sadly, during all that time, her brother Shaun blamed himself for all that had happened. Nevertheless, she couldn't let him know about that yet, since there was no way a woman could become a knight in that world. That's why, after spending several days thinking about the whole matter, she came to the conclusion that she should do whatever she could to keep them afloat. So after sending Shaun to his school's dormitory, she decided to become a mercenary. In order to do that, she had to cut and dye her hair and bound her chest to be able to head to the battlefield and make money. Becoming a mercenary was easy for her because every battlefield always had a demand for human shields and no one asked where she was from or who she was. Furthermore, she ended up siding with the Valor army and they paid her a lot, plus she was familiar with that area. Of course, the mercenary life was not easy. Despite her disguise, many men found her feminine enough to start harassing her. Fortunately, she had enough strength to beat the crap out of them in order to set an example and keep them in check. In fact, people started calling her the pretty-faced monster, which ended up becoming her nickname. Actually, her fame started growing to the point the rumors reached the ears of Shaun Kyroxis's troops. Yes, the troops of the guy who would eventually become her fiancé. Year 994. NX calendar. Battle of Kirkla. The whole battlefield was a huge mess with blood everywhere and screams covering the entire area. In the middle of that chaos, Hergine, still dressed like a man, was fighting against multiple enemies. Fortunately, thanks to her speed, agility, and graceful movements, she managed to defeat them time and time again. Sadly, they were outnumbered and eventually the retreat order came, so she didn't hesitate to follow it since she didn't want to die there. However, while she was running away, she saw a weird scene. A Valwarian knight was charging toward one of his own. It was a treacherous attack, and that was why the victim didn't see it coming and fell while the other yelled he hoped his victim rotted and died there. Hergine at the beginning tried to ignore the whole thing since that was not of her business. However, her kindness got the best of her and she ended up helping the victim. Luckily, the man was still alive and conscious, so she picked him up off the floor and took him away. Some time later, she treated his wounds the best she could and managed to stop the bleeding. Of course, his condition made the man rave about killing everybody, which made Hergine to wonder what wrong he had done to deserve that. Finally, the man woke up and after confirming she was a mercenary and a dude, she asked him why he had saved him. Hergine replied she did it for no particular reason, and after telling him he was on his own from that moment on and leaving him a piece of bread, she prepared to leave. But the man asked what was her name. Hergine answered he should tell him his name before that, to what the other replied Shaun Kyroxis. That surprised the woman since she didn't expect a direct answer, but she still fulfilled her part of the deal and told him his name was Herge. Afterwards, she left him without knowing that the man she just happened to save that day would later become her future husband. Some time later, Hergine was eating in a tavern and some people near her were discussing how Shaun Kyroxis had been rising through the ranks despite his humble beginnings to the point he was leading the knights into battle in recent times. However, she couldn't keep listening to that conversation because a red-haired guy suddenly entered, and after confirming he was the pretty-faced monster, he decided to challenge our protagonist to a duel. Hergine took her sword in one hand and a dagger in the other, which surprised the red-haired guy who was not expecting his opponent was a dual-wielding warrior. However, he was still confident and he even asked his opponent how he was planning to block his attacks. Hergine, on the other hand, simply told him he was going to fall. And he did. The red-haired guy was so impressed that after introducing himself as Tarkan, he offered him to become his partner. He even went as far as saying he was willing to become his partner if he preferred it that way. But both offers were rejected by Hergine. Some time later, our protagonist was in the middle of another battle when she suddenly sensed danger and quickly dodged some arrows. Afterwards, she located the archer and climbed a small mountain in order to get him. The archer shot several arrows, but all of them were evaded by Hergine, who ended up beating the other. The archer begged for mercy and Hergine didn't kill him. Then the other asked how he had dodged all the arrows, to what Hergine replied he was not aiming correctly. Afterwards, the archer introduced himself as Raphine and said he would follow his orders from now on since he had spared his life. And he meant it because he abandoned his guild to follow her and didn't hesitate to fight Tarkan over the seniority rights of being Hergine's subordinate. Later on, some acquaintances of Hergine caught red-handed a woman who had been disguising as a man and tried to harass her, but our protagonist and her two subordinates stopped them. The woman thanked her savior and Hergine didn't hesitate in revealing she was also a lady, so the other girl asked if she could join her. Our protagonist asked her what she could do and the other replied she was an alchemist. That surprised Hergine since she didn't know what the other girl was doing there since she was not a soldier or a mercenary. Luckily, the red-haired woman guessed what our protagonist was thinking and said she was looking for a vital ingredient from around there. Hergine then accepted her. In fact, our protagonist decided to form a mercenary group called Elizer since she already had 3 subordinates. As Elizer, they took part in the 100-Year War and stood by the highest bidder. Their involvement made both Valwar and Haglotten nervous, and as the name Elizer started to get recognized, the Battle of Shaun and Elizer occurred. However, in the end, Hergine decided to head back instead of fighting him, which took Raphine, Tarkan and Ivana by surprise. Tarkan even asked why she was doing that. But the thing was that Hergine herself didn't know why she was avoiding him. In the end, the battle started while Elizer was still in the battlefield, so they were forced to fight. And they could witness how strong Shaun was and why he was also called Monster and the Demon of the battlefield. Actually, Herjeans was just flabbergasted watching how amazing Shaun was on the battlefield. In fact, she not only noticed he was on another level but also noticed he was even skilled in weapons that were not his. Sadly, Ivana made our protagonist to come back to her senses because in the end the whole thing was a trap to get them. Their side had retreated and they were the only ones left. The quartet ended up being surrounded and the leader of their enemies told them if they sided with Haglotten their lives would be spared. However, Herjeans noticed Shaun was also with them and she asked what the other were planning to do with him, and the people from Haglotten didn't hesitate in saying they wanted him dead since he was a monster and a demon. Our protagonist was not dumb and she knew the best choice in that moment was siding with Haglotten. But she couldn't make the decision and instead she just stared at him. Shaun stared back, but then she shook his head and Herjeans' people started asking her what was the plan while their enemies keep pressuring them into making a choice. However, Herjeans kept hesitating. She knew joining Haglotten was the right thing to do. Her brother needed the money after all. Besides, she had to think about her partners too. The answer was pretty obvious, but she just kept thinking about him. Luckily, her partners saw through her and helped her by saying they didn't want to join Haglotten. Our protagonist was moved by their gesture, so after apologizing to them she gave the order and Elizer began protecting Shaun, who got shocked by that move. He asked Herjeans why they were doing this, but she just said there was no particular reason. The battle started but Shaun made a move that almost got Herjeans injured, so our protagonist almost immediately put his dagger on his throat and told him that if he put him in danger again he would kill him. Shaun kept silent and the battle resumed, but Herjeans noticed that she and Shaun had a synergy so strong while fighting that one would think they had been fighting alongside each other for ages. It was as if their souls were one. That day, the Haglotten army was close to annihilation. Yes, the 5 of them did that. That unbelievable story was told by the soldiers who survived it. As a result, the morale of the Valwar army rose while Haglotten's diminished. That battle was called the Battle of Shaun and Elizer. Thanks to that incident, the Valwar Empire was able to win and bring peace by ending the war, and Herjeans had no interaction with Shaun after that. They were not friends after all. As the captain of Elizer, Herjeans earned all the money she could and used it to pay off the fees for Estion's tuition and their state's maintenance. Then one day, she received a message from back home. Her brother had fallen off a horse. Of course, she decided to head back home, so she informed her partners of her decision. At the beginning they thought their captain was going to disband the group, but he denied it, saying he would keep in touch. Herjeans promised them they would meet again, so he was going to leave Elizer in their hands until then. Rafine, Ivana and Tarkan got emotional, but in the end they parted ways. What Herjeans didn't expect was that Shaun was waiting for her on the road. He asked him where he was going and our protagonist replied someone was waiting for him. Shaun then told him to stay there, but he refused, saying he should go. Shaun insisted, saying that was military insubordination and that he could have him court-martialed as his deputy commander. Herjeans asked him to let him go, but Shaun refused. Our protagonist insisted, saying they were no longer needed. But Shaun replied he didn't care about Elizer and added he only cared about him. Herjeans laughed his ass loud after hearing that, while saying Shaun was quite the romantic. He then added he should pay him later for saving him, so he asked him not to die until then. Shaun replied he would try, and he finally let our protagonist go. In the end, over the past 3 years, Herjeans had only met Shaun 3 times. However, she was aware she would never be able to forget those moments. In fact, she hoped that if they ever met again after the war they could have a proper duel to find out who was better, and after that have a drink together and talk. Of course, she did not expect the 2 of them to reunite in the form of marriage. Fortunately, Estion was not hurt badly, and she even thought she could finally live freely with all the money that she made as part of Elizer. However, the Imperial Order ruined everything. Herjeans couldn't help but complain that out of all the suitors available it just had to be Shaun Kyroxis. She couldn't forgive Prince Raymond for using her family name to make Shaun a count. She was also a war hero after all. Didn't she deserve a reward? And to add insult to injury, she had to make sure Shaun didn't recognize her. In that moment, Shaun arrived and we finally returned to where we were at the beginning of the story, with Herjeans complaining about the way Shaun was talking to her. Shaun immediately apologized and assured her he would try his best to adjust the clauses and send them over to her. Shaun then asked her about her younger brother, saying he wanted to meet him sometime, which took our protagonist by surprise. Herjeans and Shaun kept talking, but our protagonist was almost certain that the man was suspecting something. She had thought he wouldn't, especially because of her hair, but it appeared he had noticed something. The thing was she couldn't tell him she was hers from Elizer. It wouldn't be good if people discovered that the daughter of House Targale was a mercenary, especially since the Valwar Empire had been paying Elizer a lot of money after the war. They were probably waiting for a chance to get back at them. And on top of that, Shaun was best friend with Raymond the Crown Prince. Not to mention, everyone in Elizer could be in trouble if they found out she was hers. Our protagonist then replied Shaun was a student in Aquez University, so Shaun would be able to meet him at the wedding. That revelation surprised Shaun, who immediately asked if Shaun had deep blue eyes like her, to which Herjean said her brother's eye color was a lighter sky blue. Some time later, Shaun was having tea with Raymond, who asked his friend about his thoughts on Lady Herjean's Targale. Shaun said she reminded him of someone he knew, an answer that was not expected by the prince. However, Shaun kept thinking that Herjean's was very similar to hers. Even though she was a woman and her hair color was different, she reminded him of the man who left quite an impression and a debt he would never be able to repay. Of course, the prince didn't know the whole story, so he asked him how Herjean's could remind him of a lady he already knew, and then started teasing him, saying the innocent lady would be marrying the bad boy. That comment amused Shaun because Herjean's was nothing like the ladies he had met until then. She was headstrong for a daughter of a noble family, to the point she even amended the marriage contract with the tenacity of a mercenary. Luckily, Raymond didn't notice Shaun's thoughts and asked him to not divorce her and stay by her side even if he didn't want to, or else it would complicate things regarding his title. Shaun then reassured him by saying he kept personal matters out of his work. Somewhere else, Herjean's was inside a carriage and suddenly ordered the coachman to stop the vehicle since she had personal matters to attend to somewhere nearby. Some time later, Herjean's arrived at the place where her partners were, and when she saw them she greeted them with happiness, which took Raffian and Tarkan by surprise. Of course, Ivana was the first to react since she already knew the secret, and although she didn't know how the captain really looked, it was easy for her to connect the dots after seeing the behavior of the woman who had come. Raffian was the second to figure out who was the woman since he already was suspicious, but Tarkan was completely lost. He even thought Herjean's was the captain's sister. When the red-haired guy finally told the truth, our protagonist revealed the purpose of her visit. She wanted to reveal her secret and also tell them she was getting married. Of course, that second blow shocked the trio, especially when their captain said her future husband was Shaun. Ivana even thought she was being forced and offered herself to end the life of the bastard. Tarkan then thought that was the reason why she hesitated at the battle of Shaun and Elizer. He thought the reason was they already knew each other by that time. Herjean's tried to deny the whole thing, but Raffian interrupted her, saying there was still one thing she hadn't explained to them. In fact, the trio had heard about Shaun's marriage, but they had heard he was going to marry someone from House Targale. Herjean's then sighed, and after apologizing for keeping it a secret the whole time, she finally revealed her real name. However, Herjean's quickly tried to explain things were not that simple since she was a woman, but Raffian interrupted, saying he understood. They would make a mockery out of House Targale if they found out that a woman had been born with that talent. In that moment, Tarkan finally understood everything, and Ivana reprimanded him for being slow. Of course, the trio also realized people would be more surprised if they found out that Herj of Elizer was a woman. For that reason, Herjean's asked them to keep the secret, and the others told him she didn't have to worry about it. Ivana then offered Herjean's she would make a liquid bomb in case Kyroxis did anything stupid, but our protagonist replied that wouldn't be necessary. Raffian then offered to keep watch nearby and shoot him with his arrow, but Herjean's also refused since he would get caught. Finally, Tarkan said he would challenge Shaun to a duel, but our protagonist replied he would probably lose, making the red-haired guy sad. In the end, the quartet kept on drinking and enjoying each other's company for a while, and her partners told Herjean's that if she ever wanted to run away in the middle of the night, she knew where to find them since they would help her even if they didn't stand a chance. Some time later, Shaun returned home and Herjean's greeted him with joy since she was very happy to see her little brother. However, the boy didn't waste time and asked her why she was getting married, worried that the whole thing was his fault for not being good with a sword. Shaun then got emotional and promised his sister he would do his best to stay at the top of his class that semester. The siblings then started to chat about the marriage, but they were interrupted by Shaun, who just arrived to the state. Shaun stared at the boy intensely, and Herjean's realized he had come to check if Shaun was hers. In fact, she thought he had run all the way there to check that just in case he ran away. Shaun then had a cup of tea, and our protagonist asked him why he had come, to which Shaun said he wanted to see her for a quick moment, and since he already had, he would be on his way. That behavior didn't please Herjean's at all because she thought that was too convenient. However, Shaun added insult to injury by asking her if she was not going to see him out. Herjeans got pissed then since he was the one who had showed up in the first place. Nevertheless, in the end she agreed, and while they both were walking outside she ended up admitting that despite having quite the temper he was sure stunning. Not to mention his skin was nicely toned. Herjeans then was brought back to reality because Shaun grabbed her by her waist and almost immediately got really close to her as if he was going to kiss her. Our protagonist didn't know how to react, but in the end she decided to let herself go, and after closing her eyes she got ready for the kiss. However, Shaun took her hand and told her that for a noble lady she had some rough hands. Our protagonist immediately got nervous thinking he knew her secret all along. But then she also thought that maybe he was testing her, because if he was so sure that she was hers he would have probably thrown a sword at her instead of using that roundabout approach. Herjeans then told him that her family was not wealth compared to other nobles, so she had to work to survive despite being a noble lady. Of course, saying all that while being so close to him was not easy at all. Shaun then hugged her, which made her flinch, and afterwards asked her what kind of work while whispering in her ear. Herjeans finally had enough, and after pushing him away she told him they were not a married couple yet, to which the man replied while chuckling she was stronger than she looked. Nevertheless, our protagonist didn't let go what had happened and told him he had no right to handle her the way he wanted. The man replied he would have the right after the marriage, but Herjeans made very clear he wouldn't ever have the right to do so. However, instead of getting angry, Shaun started laughing and replied he was looking forward to it. Some time later, a red-haired woman entered like a storm in Shaun's study. In fact, his butler had to apologize to him because he couldn't stop her. However, Shaun remained composed even when the lady asked him if he was really getting married. The knight then said to the woman called Cecilia that was not the time for small talk. Nevertheless, the lady ignored his words and told him no one knew what Herjeans sold while doing business overseas. She went as far as to add that for all they knew, it might not just be material goods. Shaun then made her notice those were some harsh words. Nevertheless, Cecilia didn't take the hint, and after leaning towards the knight in a provocative way she even told him she didn't care if he got married. The woman even started to undress, trying to seduce the knight. But Shaun's reaction was not what she expected, because he asked her since when was she given the authority to do as she pleases. The knight then added that he could only tolerate her disrespectful attitude for so long, which made the butler to do a huge effort to contain his laughter. Of course that displeased Cecilia, who quickly left the study while harumping. She even slammed the door. After she left, the butler told Shaun that apparently Lady Cecilia had fought with her father, Count Epernay, about marrying him recently. Nevertheless, that information barely interested the knight, who instead asked if Reeve was back since he needed to go see him. The butler replied he was not back, and then Shaun asked about Elizer, and the other said they were still working without their captain. However, he added that it seemed like they had gathered in secret recently and Herge was also present. The knight then asked what the other had found about House Targale, and the butler proceeded to report his findings. According to his investigation, in the year 994 of the NX calendar their parents passed away, and their son Estion entered Aquez University. The whereabouts of Herjeans Targale at that time were unknown, although he was told that she had lived overseas for business reasons. Then in the year 996, she came back to the Valwar Empire and hadn't left since. Shaun then asked if Aquez wasn't known for its high tuition. Unfortunately, after apologizing, the butler replied that they still hadn't exactly figured that part out. However, he added they were doing their best to look into it. Shaun then started to think it was not easy trying to find people after the war, since most of them never make it back. Afterwards, he started to wonder what would have happened if he would have told Herge to stay at that time. Shaun wanted to ask Herge why he had saved him that time, although he was pretty sure the other probably would have smiled and answered no reason. The butler then got bold enough to ask the knight if he was suspecting that Lady Herjeans might be Herge. However, although the question surprised him, Shaun replied sincerely, saying he was not sure. In fact, he added that he would like to see her wielding a sword. The butler then said that there was something rather trivial from that day's report. Apparently, he had been informed that Master Harvin was currently in the process of making a rapier and a main gauche. Of course, that piqued Shaun's attention since those were Herge's weapons. Not to mention he was surprised Master Harvin had accepted the order, because last time he placed an order that cranky old man didn't even bother listening to him. Shaun then recalled that Master Harvin only crafted weapons for those who were truly skilled, which could mean only one thing. The knight then ordered the butler to keep watch on the smith's shop. Some time later, in that smith's shop, Herjeans arrived and Harvin greeted her with a smile. He even told her that he thought he had created a masterpiece. He went as far as to add some decorations fit for a lady and ask a friend to make a pretty case and belt for her. Herjeans was really pleased with that, and she started remembering how they had met 1 year before. Of course, at that time Harbin mocked her after she told him she wanted him to make a rapier and a main gauche for her. He then threw her a wooden stick and asked her to show her skills. It was then Herjean's turn to mock Harbin, and after purposely pretending she didn't know what to do, she suddenly executed a powerful thrust that impressed the smith. Harbin even told her she was the second because the first was Shaun. That revelation made her flinch, and she asked if he was making a sword for him, and when Harbin said he wasn't, she then asked him why not. The smith then told her that he didn't need one because for Shaun it didn't matter if the sword he wielded was made by the greatest blacksmiths in the world or a cheap one from the bin. Herjeans didn't fully get the explanation, but at least got relieved thinking he was not going to the shop to pick up a sword. In the end, she asked him if he would still accept the order, and the smith said he would, although it might take a while. Harbin then asked her where to send the weapons, and she replied to House Targale, which shocked the smith. Back to the present, Harbin showed both weapons to Herjeans, whose eyes were literally shining since she thought they were gorgeous. However, in that moment someone knocked the door and our protagonist froze when she discovered the man who was knocking was Shaun. Herjeans quickly regained her composure and hid inside the shop in time so when Shaun entered he didn't see her. Our protagonist then decided to leave the shop through the back door, but then she realized the knight had brought his men with him. In the meantime, Shaun asked Harbin if he could make him a sword and the other refused. However, in that moment the knight said there were rumors that the smith was working on a new sword recently, and he then asked what sword he was making. Harbin replied that he was working on a rapier and a main gauche, which shocked Herjeans. Shaun then asked who had placed the order, but the smith didn't say anything. The knight then said that wielding a rapier and a main gauche together was not that easy. He even added that those two things paired together sounded ridiculous. Finally, he said that only someone with a lot of experience and talent in swordsmanship could manage such an unorthodox way of fighting. In the end, there was only one person out there who could do that, Herj of the mercenary group Elizer. However, Harbin remained silent, which Herjeans deeply appreciated. The woman then thought she would leave right after Shaun. Sadly, the knight found out the back door of the shop was open, and that was the cue for our protagonist to act. She tore apart his dress to move better, used the fabric she got from that as a scarf, put on the hood, grabbed the case with the weapons, left the shop, threw the case as high as she could and beat Shaun's men in order to escape. Afterwards, she caught the case, and when she was about to leave the area, Shaun caught up with him and asked him why he was running away. He then said he thought of him as a friend, and then added that if he thought the same he would be grateful if he told him the truth and turn around so that he could see him. Sadly, Herjeans kept quiet and Shaun got angry thinking that was his answer. The worst part was that Herjeans was dying to tell him the whole truth, that she was Herjeans, the lady he was about to marry. But unfortunately that was something she couldn't decide on her own, because if people found out she was Herj, both House Targale and Elizer would be in danger. In the end, she clenched her right fist, which was the one grabbing the case, and decided to leave the place, leaving a desolate night in the process. Some time later, a butler was reporting Prince Raymond the NX followers had been roaming around the Empire recently. That puzzled the prince since he hadn't heard anything about the Illwoods passing away, so he asked if the followers were roaming beyond the holy city of Anaxion. Anexism was a religion accepted in many nations. A high priest called Illwoods listened for the voice of God and preached what had been said. The prince then said that the followers only left the city when it was time to search for a new Illwoods, and the butler replied that all the other countries were as confused as they were. Afterwards, the butler showed the prince a new bill sent by Elizer, which surprised Raymond. After seeing the others' reaction, the butler said that they had a lot of expenses to pay in recent times since the war was over. He then added that Elizer might side with Haglotten if he didn't sign it, since they had already been eyed by them. Raymond still complained about the whole thing because they have even offered them positions in their order of knights, but all they seemed to want was money. He then asked the butler what had Elizer been up to lately, to which the other replied they were still active, but they were only taking small jobs. The prince then said that if Elizer ceased to exist, then they wouldn't need to pay them. That statement shocked the butler, who quickly replied that the last thing they wanted was for them to be their enemy. Raymond then said that he was joking and ordered him to pay them and keep a watch on their whereabouts. The butler then left, and the prince thought he might need to talk to Shaun about that. In the meantime, in Targale's state, Herjeans was thinking about the last encounter with Shaun and concluded that perhaps it had been a good thing that she had run away. Besides, preparation for the wedding were going as planned. In that moment, Eshin arrived and our protagonist grabbed his hands, noticing some scars on his wrists. She then thought that it was all because she had the talent and not him, so she was the one to blame for those scars. She then remembered when his little brother tried to commit suicide because he couldn't stand the fact of not being talented with a sword and not being able to save their family. Back to the present, Shaun apologized to her sister because it was his fault that she had to go through that arranged marriage. Herjeans then said that it was okay because she had agreed to that, so he didn't have to blame himself. Some time later, our protagonist was already wearing her wedding dress while thinking she couldn't believe she was getting married, that she was hungry and that the corset was killing her. However, she gathered her strength and went to the place where the ceremony would take place while being escorted by his little brother. She then was received by Shaun and started getting nervous while thinking he was looking very handsome. Herjeans even wondered if she had always been attracted to good-looking men like him. The ceremony went on smoothly and eventually it was time for the kiss. Herjeans got ready despite being extremely nervous, but Shaun took her by surprise because instead of a light kiss he decided to go for a French kiss, and a deep and long one at that. The guests and even the priest started to feeling a little uncomfortable because their kiss just didn't finish. Finally, Shaun let her go and everybody started to congratulate the new couple. Shaun was smiling like a little kid who had just done a mischief while Herjeans was blushing really hard trying to catch her breath. She then gave him a reproachful look, but he just smiled and she blushed hard again. Herjeans then thought that their marriage was an arranged one, nothing more nothing less, so she couldn't understand what was with that kiss he just gave her. Herjeans was taking a bath and she still couldn't believe it was already their first night as a married couple. When she finished, a couple of maids called her countess, and that reminded her she was married to a count. She then thought she had heard that originally the woman had to prove her purity in an arranged marriage. The couple even have their parents over to watch their children during their first night together. Fortunately, she didn't have to worry about that since the thought of that alone was scary to her. She then entered the bedroom and was surprised because the entire decor had been redone. In fact, she thought they had overdone it with the rose petals they had placed over the bed. Herjeans then removed all of them and focused her attention in the food and wine that was placed in a table nearby. However, when she was drinking the wine, Shaun entered the bedroom, surprising her to the point he was choking on the wine. Herjeans then regained her composure and told him she couldn't help it because she hadn't eaten anything the entire day. Shaun didn't say anything and just got seated, so an awkward silence filled the place. Luckily, our protagonist decided to get things rolling by pouring him a cup of wine, and while he was drinking it, the woman couldn't help but started feeling nervous again while thinking they would be spending their first night together. Suddenly, Shaun asked Herjeans if she was hiding anything from him. He then added that they were already married, so they shouldn't have any secrets between them. Herjeans, however, didn't fall for that trick and asked him back if he had any secrets. The knight then decided to spice things up and took her to the floor. Afterwards, Shaun looked at her chest and told her she was a woman after all, which pissed her off to the point she tried to escape from him. However, Shaun grabbed one of her legs and after placing her face down on the floor and getting on top of her, he reminded her that that was their first night. That made Herjeans really nervous because she thought they were about to do the deed in that moment and place. Shaun then asked her if that was her first time, and that made her react by jumping towards the bed and covering with the sheets afterwards. Shaun smiled after seeing her reaction and slowly went to the bed. Once he was really close to her, he said that they would be up all night if she kept that up. He then removed the sheets and told her that when he looked at her he couldn't help but feel angry. She was surprised by that and thought that she was feeling guilty for several reasons, but was afraid to ask him why he felt like that. Shaun then added that he still had some uncertainties inside him and was not sure how he felt, but he felt like everything was going to work out if he was with her. The knight then asked her how she felt. Herjeans thought that when she looked into his purple eyes she felt like she was being pulled in, but in the end didn't say anything, so Shaun told her that if she didn't want to answer, that was fine with him. In the end, he couldn't do anything about the fact that that was her first time, but he would make sure she felt good. They then started making love and they both were truly enjoying the act. Unfortunately, Shaun noticed that Herjeans' body was covered by several scars and he asked her how she had gotten them. Shaun started licking Herjeans' hands while saying the calluses she had in them were as if she had held a sword before, and at that point she couldn't stand it anymore because she was both aroused and nervous, so she told him it was enough. However, he didn't stop and she thought she couldn't help herself because it was so overwhelming. She then hugged him tightly while moaning to the point her nails left some marks on his back. In the end, Herjeans had to admit the whole act felt good. The knight kept going, but he never stopped asking her for directions and making sure she felt good. Shaun then started dreaming and we heard somebody saying Lady Kyroxis passed away while she was giving birth to that child, and after that Sir Kyroxis died in an accident, so people started believing Shaun was a demon who had killed his parents. We then saw the knight while he was still a kid talking to a woman and a man. The woman said she got that they were his closest kin, but she wondered what if they died too. The man, on the other hand, told the kid that from that moment on he was a servant. It was obvious that his adoptive parents treated him badly to the point he wondered why he was even alive to live that hellish life. One day the daughter of the couple tried to seduce him and invited him to her room, threatening him to not giving him any food the next day if he didn't do as he was told. Unfortunately, her father caught them in the act and the woman quickly blamed Shaun, saying he had seduced her. In the end, people kept taking advantage of him and he ended up selling himself to women for shelter and food, which little by little caused him a trauma. That was why when the war started he didn't hesitate and went to the battlefield, because he would rather fight than kept living like that. Sadly, a traitor tried to kill him, and while his consciousness was fading away, his hatred didn't stop growing. However, in the end he didn't die because a guy saved him, and that was the first time he was treated so kindly without something in return. Of course that astonished him, so he made sure to make it through that in hopes that they met again so that he could get an answer from him. Some time later, a subordinate reported Shaun that something was not right and Herge was leaving. He then told him that they had saw him gathering his things and saying farewell to the members of Elizer. Shaun then ran as fast as he could while thinking he didn't want Herge to leave. He was even willing to give him money or a title. Shaun finally caught up with him and he suddenly woke up from his dream. He then stared at Hergines, thinking she was beautiful, but that there was something unusual about her since she was definitely not like the other ladies. We then found out that he didn't plan on spending the night with her, but seeing her having a little party for herself made him change his mind. He then thought she was full of mysteries and that she might be even Herge for all he knew, but he then said that even if she wasn't, that night was truly an unforgettable one, and that being with her helped him get his mind off of Herge. Some time later Hergines woke up and stared at Shaun while thinking he had a unique charm to him. The knight then woke up and caught her staring at him. Hergines asked him if he had slept well, and when he said good morning to her she couldn't help but blush hard while asking herself why was her heart beating that strong and fast. He then took advantage of her distraction to give her a good morning kiss that make her blush even more. She was aware that they were a couple and that they had even spent the night together, but she still didn't understand why he was being that friendly all of a sudden. She then tried to get up, but she started feeling pain and Shaun asked her if she was okay. Hergines then said it was hurting thanks to a certain somebody. Shaun then said he was sure that was only part of the story, and our protagonist admitted it but added that it had not been that pleasant either. He then told her next time he would make sure it felt really good, and the woman asked him to stop talking and to help her get up. He helped her and asked her to get some rest that day since they had a lot to do starting the next day. Finally, before leaving he reminded her that the servants and maids were from the Imperial Palace, so she shouldn't trust them too much. Hergines then recalled that the Imperial Palace had indeed sent servants and maids to house Targale, making the existing ones to be assigned to do trivial jobs and menial chores. Of course she knew they hadn't just sent them those new maids out of pure courtesy. That was why she told him that it looked like His Highness didn't trust him completely. However, Shaun didn't take it to heart and said that it was due to the way he was raised. Afterwards, he got close to her and after patting her head he asked her to make their marriage work together. Our protagonist tried to act as if she was feeling uncomfortable with the patting, but after he left she kept looking at the door while touching her head and blushing. Afterwards, she received a congratulatory gift from His Highness, which was a necklace paired with 2 earrings, and the 3 pieces screamed luxury, especially because of the big diamonds they had. Hergines started to feel super pressured after seeing it, but tried to remain calm and said she should send him her gratitude. Unfortunately, she overacted a little and the maids got the impression the lady was not impressed with those big diamonds. However, the maids quickly regained their composure and told Hergines that now that she was the Countess of House Targale, she had to attend social gatherings from that moment onwards. That brought back some memories to our protagonist, who recalled that she had already made her debut in high society. However, her family was already in ruins at that time, so nobody took interest in her. Not to mention that according to her memories, the men of high society always talked about women. Stories of harassment and their escapades were just something for them to brag about, and it was common for nobles to have a lover or 2 even if they were married. So as someone with the memories of their past life in modern society, she just couldn't relate. Nevertheless, she had to accept that from that moment onwards she would be carrying a fan and would head to parties instead of carrying a sword and head to war. Somewhere else, some butler reported to a noble that the wedding at the Targale Countship had ended, and the noble said that that insignificant fool had ended up becoming a Targale. Afterwards he ordered the butler to send the prepared gifts while making some disapproving sounds, since the noble was visibly angry after seeing some dirt on the balcony railing. The butler noticed the gesture and what had caused it and immediately went to clean the railing, while the noble thought that noble, perfect, and beautiful were not the words that best described Shaun. Back with her jeans, she was in her study writing something when she suddenly stopped to massage her shoulders, thinking that she was glad Shaun and her at least worked well together. She then went to the balcony and stretched while thinking he seemed like the type to do whatever he wanted. Yet he always respected her opinion and kept her up to date on things. In the end, our protagonist simply threw herself onto the bed wondering if he was returning that day or not. She then recalled that after their first night together, Shaun had been kept busy at the Imperial Palace, so she hadn't been able to see him, although he had said to her that he would be coming back that day. She then thought that a part of her wished he didn't return while another part of her wished he would. Herjeans then wondered what was that uncertainty that she was feeling because she believed she was starting to miss him. Nevertheless, that realization upset her and she immediately denied it, saying that she didn't miss him at all while jumping and sitting on the edge of the bed. She then told herself to stop having weird thoughts and started searching for something under the bed. A short time later, he grabbed her two babies, her rapier and her main gauche, and decided to have some fun with them since she thought Shaun wouldn't be heading back home that night. However, almost immediately she heard something and got on guard while a lot of assassins appeared in the room from above. The intruders started to check the whole room, and one of the subordinates told the boss that the lady was Shaun's wife. That startled the other because he thought Shaun would have returned from the palace by that time. In the meantime, Herjeans was thinking what was the best course of action because she was sure that taking them out was not hard, but cleaning up the mess afterwards would be a real challenge, especially if she considered she couldn't have their corpses lying on the bed. An awkward silence filled the room, and soon after the assassins decided to attack. However, Herjeans, instead of attacking, told them that she was in a bit of a pinch at that moment, so she was willing to let them go. She even said that if they left without making a noise, she wouldn't even ask who had sent them. Unfortunately, the assassins didn't take her seriously and continued their attack, forcing her to beat the crap out of them. Her power was so overwhelming that she didn't have to unsheath her weapons to defeat them. Of course, that meant they could keep fighting, so Herjeans decided to change her approach to the whole situation since she didn't have time for any of that. Our protagonist then challenged them because she was planning to take on all of them.